My sister slept with my boyfriend while I fought for my life in the hospital after a car crash. She's practically a vegetable now. Why waste your life waiting? She told him. They married while I was learning to speak again. 11 years later, she ambushed me on the street, not knowing I had already set everything in motion. Hello everyone. Thank you for being here with me today. Before I begin my story, I'd love to know which city you're joining us from. Please feel free to share in the comments. Now, let me take you into this story. You know that feeling when you look at someone and you just know? That was me and Grant. It wasn't some lightning bolt, Hollywood kind of love. It was slower, warmer. Like sinking into a hot bath at the end of a long day. We met in our early 20s, just a couple of kids trying to figure out life, and we ended up figuring it out together. For 5.5 years, he was my person. My morning coffee, my late-night phone call, the one I'd text with the stupidest memes knowing he'd get it. Our first apartment was a tiny shoebox on the 3rd floor of a walk-up, with windows that overlooked a brick wall. We were so broke, but so happy. I remember us spending an entire Saturday trying to assemble a cheap IKEA bookshelf. The instructions were like hieroglyphics. I had the screws, he had the Allen key, and neither of us knew what we were doing. We got so frustrated, we ended up just sitting on the floor in a pile of particle board, laughing until we cried. He ordered a pizza, and we ate it right there on the floor, using the instruction manual as a placemat. That night, leaning against our lopsided, half-finished bookshelf, he'd said, "You know, even when things are a total mess, it's fun with you." That's what our love felt like, finding joy in the mess. I remember another evening, a few years later, in October. The air was just starting to get that crisp, smoky smell of autumn. We were walking through a park, kicking through piles of red and gold leaves like we were kids again. He stopped under a big oak tree, pulled me close, and the smell of his worn leather jacket was so familiar, so safe. He was quiet for a long time, just holding me, and I could feel the steady beat of his heart against my cheek. He finally spoke, his voice low and serious. "You know, AUD, this is it for me. I can see it all. The little house with the slightly crooked porch, a dog that's probably too big for the living room, and you." My heart did this little flip. "Yeah?" I whispered. "Yeah," he said, pulling back to look at me. "I see you, sitting on the porch swing, maybe with a couple of kids running around in the yard, making a mess." He smiled. "I'm not saying it's all going to be easy. I know my job is up and down. But when I see that future, none of the scary stuff matters. Because you're in it. That's the only part that matters." We weren't rich. He was working a sales job with a commission-based salary that was unpredictable at best, and I was just starting out in graphic design. But none of that mattered then. We had each other. We mapped out our future like it was a road trip we couldn't wait to start. He was my rock, the steady beat in the chaotic song of my life. And I was his. I believed, with every fiber of my being, that nothing could ever break us. I was so beautifully, tragically wrong. My family, well, they were complicated. My younger brother, Miles, was my ally. Quiet, observant, but fiercely loyal. We had our own language of shared looks and inside jokes. My parents were parents. They loved me in their own way, but it was a love that came with a set of unspoken expectations. And then there was Meredith. My older sister. To the outside world, Meredith was perfect. Polished, ambitious, always knew the right thing to say. She had a good job in finance, a meticulously clean apartment, and a 5-year plan. She was the daughter my parents bragged about at dinner parties. Our relationship was fine. We weren't the kind of sisters who shared clothes and secrets. There was always a subtle competition there, mostly from her side. A little barb disguised as a joke, a backhanded compliment. She never seemed to approve of Grant. Not openly, of course. That wasn't her style. It was more in the little things. We'd be at my parents' house for Sunday dinner. The smell of pot roast would fill the air, and everyone would be laughing. I'd catch Grant's eye across the table and we'd share a small, secret smile. And Meredith would see it. Her own smile would tighten, just for a second. Then, she'd turn to him, her voice sweet as sugar. "So, Grant, how's the job? Still hitting those sales targets?" It was always about his salary, his stability. It was a performance for my father, who valued financial success above all else. One time, after he'd had a particularly rough quarter, she put her hand on my arm and said, loud enough for him to hear, "You know, Audrey, a man needs to feel stable. Love is wonderful, but it doesn't pay the mortgage." I remember the drive home that night was quiet. I finally asked him, "Does she bother you?" Grant just sighed, his hands tight on the steering wheel. "She just makes me feel like I'm constantly failing some kind of test I didn't know I was taking." I'd try to defend her. "She's just pragmatic, honey. She wants to make sure I'm taken care of." But even as I said it, the words felt hollow. A small part of me saw it for what it was. It wasn't concern. It was condescension. It was her way of reminding everyone that she was the successful one, the one who had it all figured out, while I was just in love. It felt like she was constantly pointing out his perceived flaws, his insecurities, holding them up to the light for everyone to see. I should have stood up for him more. I should have seen the pattern. But I loved my sister, and I wanted to believe she loved me back. The day it happened is a blur. A collage of shattered glass and screeching tires. I remember the blue sky, the sun warm on my face through the windshield. It was a Tuesday. I had a big client meeting that had gone surprisingly well, and I was driving home, feeling on top of the world. I had the windows down, and I was singing along, badly, to some song on the radio. I was thinking about what to make for dinner, thinking about Grant. The next thing I remember is a flash of red from my left. A horn blaring, a sound so loud it felt like it was inside my head, vibrating through my bones. I remember the horrifying, screeching sound of metal on metal. The world spun, a violent, chaotic tumble of green and blue and gray. Then, nothing. Just a deep, silent blackness. Waking up was not a gentle process. It was like surfacing from deep, dark water, gasping for air, my lungs burning. The world came back in fragments, in painful, disjointed snapshots. The rhythmic, insistent beeping of a machine next to my bed. The sterile, antiseptic smell that clings to every corner of a hospital, a smell I'll forever associate with terror. Muffled voices that sounded like they were coming from the end of a long tunnel. My first clear thought was pain. A dull, throbbing ache that started in my head and radiated through my entire body, a fire in my bones. I tried to open my eyes, but the lids felt like they were weighted down with lead. I managed a slit. The light was a physical blow, blindingly white. I saw blurry shapes moving around me. A nurse in blue scrubs, her face a mask of professional calm. My mom's face, streaked with tears, her mouth moving but no sound coming out. Grant. His face was ashen, his eyes wide with a horror I'd never seen before. And Meredith. She was standing right beside him, a hand on his back. In those first few days, I was a ghost in my own body, drifting in and out of consciousness. I'd hear snippets of conversations that made no sense. TBA, traumatic brain injury, swelling in the frontal lobe, long road to recovery, we don't know the extent of the damage yet, the words were just noise. My brain felt like a broken radio, catching only static and bits of phrases. One time, I came to for a moment and saw Meredith whispering something to Grant. He looked lost. Devastated. I thought she was just being a supportive sister-in-law-to-be. I was so naive. I remember the doctor standing at the foot of my bed, a clipboard in his hand, his face grim. He was talking to my family, but his words seemed to float right over to me, each one a tiny, sharp stone. The next few weeks are critical. Her cognitive functions could be affected. Physical therapy will be extensive. It's going to be a long and uncertain journey. Uncertainty. That was the word that hung in the air, thick and suffocating. It was the word that planted a seed of fear in Grant's heart. A seed that my sister was only too happy to water. I didn't know it then, of course. I was floating in a fog of pain medication and confusion, my days a meaningless cycle of nurses checking my vitals and my family's worried faces floating above me. But later, after everything came out, after the dust had settled and the truth was laid bare, I pieced it all together. I replayed every memory, every overheard whisper, and I finally understood what my sister did while I was lying in that hospital bed, fighting just to remember my own name. She saw her opportunity. She saw Grant, terrified and broken, watching the woman he loved reduced to a fragile, damaged version of herself, struggling to speak. And she moved in. Not like a vulture, but like a savior. She was the strong one, the stable one. She was there every single day, a pillar of calm competence. She brought him coffee. She learned the nurses' names. She talked to the doctors, asking sharp, intelligent questions, and then translated the medical jargon for my distraught parents. She handled the mountain of insurance paperwork. She made herself indispensable. And then, when she had earned his trust, she started her real work. It wasn't a single conversation. It was a slow, insidious poisoning of his mind, a campaign of psychological warfare waged in quiet waiting rooms and sterile hospital corridors. It was a masterpiece of manipulation. I can almost hear her voice, calm and reasonable, as she sat next to him, the smell of burnt coffee hanging in the air. "Grant, you have to be realistic. The doctors said it's uncertain. What if she's never the same person she was? Have you thought about that?" She would let that hang in the air, a terrifying possibility. Then, a day or so later, another little drop of poison. "You're so young. You have your whole life, your career, ahead of you. This is a lifetime of care. Are you prepared for that?" She made it sound like a question of logistics, of practicality. But it was a question designed to breed terror. She painted a picture of a bleak future for him. A future where he was a full-time caregiver, his dreams sacrificed at the altar of my recovery. His own financial instability, his shaky salary, became her weapon. How could you possibly afford the kind of care she's going to need? It's not fair to you. It's not fair to her, to be a burden on you like that. She made it sound like she was concerned for him. For me. But she was carving out a space for herself in the wreckage of my life. And Grant, in his weakest, most terrified state, started to listen. He saw the mountain of medical bills, the endless therapy sessions, the woman he loved struggling to form a sentence, and he was scared. Meredith didn't offer him comfort. She offered him an escape. The final step in her plan was the most depraved. She had chipped away at his loyalty, filled his head with fear and doubt. Now, she offered herself as the solution. She wasn't just an escape, she was a promotion. A life upgrade. A secure future, free of the messy, unpredictable reality of my recovery. I can picture the scene so clearly it makes my stomach turn. It's one of those long nights in the sterile hospital waiting room. The lights are buzzing overhead, the coffee is burnt, the chairs are molded plastic and deeply uncomfortable. He's probably staring at the scuffed linoleum floor, his mind a whirlwind of guilt and fear. And she's there, a calm, steady presence beside him. She probably put her hand on his knee, a gesture of comfort that was anything but. "Grant," she would have said, her voice soft and full of manufactured sympathy. "You deserve happiness. You deserve a partner who can stand beside you, not one you have to carry through life. You can't set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm." She'd use these little therapy speak phrases to make her poison sound like wisdom. And then, the final, venomous offer. "I can be that for you," she'd whisper, leaning in closer. I'm stable. I have a great career. I can help you. We could build a real life together. A good life. A life without all this sickness. You wouldn't have to worry about money, or your career, or any of this. And in that moment, she sealed his fate. And mine. The physical betrayal was just a symptom of the deeper sickness. They started sleeping together. He told me later it just happened, as if it were a weather event. But it didn't just happen. It was a calculated move. It was the consummation of her conquest, a way to bind him to her with a new layer of secrets and shame. It wasn't about love or passion. It was a transaction. A hostile takeover of my life. She saw vulnerability, and she exploited it with surgical precision. She took his fear and his weakness and twisted them into a decision. He convinced himself it wasn't a betrayal, but a mercy. A sad necessity. He chose the easy path she paved for him with her lies and ambition. He agreed to her plan. He agreed to leave me, the broken thing in the hospital bed, and marry my sister. The perfect, polished, whole version of what a partner should be. While I was oblivious, floating in my medicated haze, my brother Miles was watching. He's always been the quiet one in the family, the one you almost forget is in the room. But he doesn't miss a thing. His silence is not emptiness, it's observation. And he started to notice the little things that were wrong, the subtle shifts in the atmosphere that everyone else was too distraught to see. He noticed how Meredith would answer questions for Grant when a doctor came by. How she'd put a proprietary hand on his arm when my mother was crying. He noticed the way they'd fall silent when you walked into the waiting room, a sudden, guilty stillness. At first, he probably thought it was just the stress of the situation, two people leaning on each other in a crisis. But the feeling that something was deeply, fundamentally wrong wouldn't go away. It was a splinter in his mind. The breaking point came about a month after my accident. He went to Meredith's apartment to pick up some mail for our parents that had been sent there by mistake. She wasn't home, but she'd told him where the spare key was hidden. He let himself in, the air in her apartment cool and smelling faintly of lavender. And there, on her polished granite kitchen counter, sitting right next to a pile of bills, was a catalog from a high-end jeweler. It was open to a page of classic diamond solitaires, the corner of the page neatly folded down. He told me later that his first thought was confusion. Who was she engaged to? She hadn't mentioned anyone. Then, a cold dread washed over him. It started in his stomach and spread through his whole body. He started connecting the dots. The whispers in the hospital, the way Grant avoided his eyes for the past few weeks, the sheer amount of time they were spending together, alone. It couldn't be. It was too monstrous, too much like a twisted soap opera. He didn't wait. He didn't second-guess himself. He drove straight from her apartment to the hospital, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. He found Meredith in the cafeteria, calmly stirring a cup of tea, looking perfectly composed. He sat down opposite her and put the key to her apartment on the table between them. He just looked at her, his gaze unwavering. "What's going on, Meredith?" he asked, his voice low and steady. She tried to play dumb, to feign ignorance. "What are you talking about, Miles? You look upset." "The rings, Meredith," he said, pushing the key a little closer to her. "On your counter." "Who are you marrying?" He said. Her face went pale. The composure cracked, just for a second, revealing the ugly truth underneath. She tried to lie, of course. Some flimsy story about a guy from work, a whirlwind romance she hadn't told anyone about yet. But Miles didn't buy it. He just kept staring at her, his silence more damning than any accusation. He pushed. He kept asking questions until she finally broke. Her confession wasn't tearful or remorseful. It was cold and defiant. "It's for the best, Miles," she said, as if she were discussing a business merger. "It's what's best for everyone." He knew then. He knew he had to be the one to tell me. He couldn't let me find out from them. He had to protect me, even if the truth was going to destroy me. Miles insisted they tell me together. I think he wanted to make sure they couldn't twist the story, couldn't soften the blow with more lies. He wanted to be a witness. By this point, about 6 weeks after the accident, I was more lucid. The fog had started to lift, though my world was still a confusing jumble of physical therapy and speech exercises. I could hold a conversation, but my thoughts were slow, like wading through thick mud. Simple tasks were exhausting. They came into my room one afternoon. I remember it so vividly. The sun was streaming through the window, making little dust motes dance in the air. I had just finished a grueling session with a physical therapist and was resting. It felt so peaceful, so normal. Miles stood by the door, his arms crossed, his face a grim mask. He was a sentinel, guarding what was left of my life. Meredith and Grant sat in the 2 uncomfortable vinyl chairs next to my bed. Grant wouldn't look at me. He just stared at his hands, twisting them in his lap as if trying to wring the guilt out of them. His silence was a confession in itself. Meredith was the one who spoke. She reached out and took my hand. Her touch felt cold and alien, like a stranger's. "Audrey," she began, her voice dripping with a fake sympathy that made my skin crawl. "We have something to tell you. We know this is going to be difficult to hear. Grant and we've grown very close through all of this." I just stared at her, my slow brain trying to catch up. Close? Of course they were close. They were worried about me. That made sense. I nodded slowly. "It's more than that," she continued, her grip tightening on my hand as if to brace me. "We've spent so much time together, worrying about you, and we've realized we're in love." The words didn't register at first. They were just sounds, disconnected from meaning. Love? But Grant loved me. We had a plan. The house, the dog, the lopsided bookshelf. Then I looked at Grant. He finally lifted his head, and his eyes were full of guilt and something else. Pity. That's what broke me. The pity in his eyes. He was looking at me like I was something broken that needed to be put out of its misery. "We're getting married," Meredith said, her voice clear and steady. The final blow. She delivered it with the dispassionate air of a news anchor reading a report. I felt the air leave my lungs in a sudden whoosh. The beeping of the heart monitor next to me sped up, a frantic, panicked rhythm that matched the chaos exploding in my chest. I looked from my sister's triumphant face to my boyfriend's defeated one. The whole world just stopped. The dancing dust motes froze in the air. It was a betrayal so profound, so unthinkable, that my mind simply couldn't process it. It was like they were speaking a foreign language I couldn't comprehend. Married? My sister? And my Grant? It was a nightmare. I closed my eyes, praying with every ounce of my being that when I opened them, I'd be back in my car, humming to the radio, before the flash of red. But when I opened them, they were still there. And the nightmare was real. For a long moment, there was only the sound of the heart monitor. Beep. 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 Faster and faster, a frantic alarm screaming into the silence. A nurse peeked her head in, her face a mask of concern, but Miles just gave a slight shake of his head, and she backed away, closing the door softly. My first coherent thought wasn't rage. It was a deep, bone-chilling cold. A numbness that spread from my chest out to my fingertips, as if my body was shutting down. I pulled my hand out of Meredith's. Her skin felt slick and foreign. I looked at Grant. I finally found my voice, and I was surprised at how steady it sounded, how devoid of emotion, even though everything inside me was shattering into a million tiny pieces. "Get out," I said. He opened his mouth to say something, probably another pathetic, pre-rehearsed apology. I could see the words forming on his lips. "No, I cut him off, the word sharp like a shard of glass. Don't say another word to me. Not one. Just get out. Meredith tried to intervene, to play the role of the reasonable adult. Audrey, be reasonable. We know this is a shock. We wanted to tell you in person because we respect you. Reasonable? The numbness was starting to burn away, replaced by a hot, white-hot fury that licked at the edges of my shock. Respect me? I let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time in my life, I saw the predator behind the perfect, polished mask. You stood in this room, day after day, you held my hand, you told me I was strong, all while you were sinking your claws into my life and stealing it from me. There is nothing reasonable about that. I turned my full attention back to Grant. His face was a mess of shame and cowardice. Our future? The house, the dog? The lopsided bookshelf? Was any of it real? Or was it all just something to say? He just shook his head, unable to speak, tears welling in his eyes. But his tears meant nothing to me. They were for him, not for me. Get out, I repeated, each word a heavy stone I was throwing at them. Both of you. Get out of my room. Get out of my sight. Get out of my life. They finally stood up. Grant looked like a ghost, but Meredith, she had the audacity to look almost relieved. Like she had done her duty, delivered the bad news, and could now move on with her prize. As they walked out the door, with Miles staring them down the hallway, I said one last thing. My voice cracked, but it was full of a conviction I didn't know I had. Your wedding, your marriage, it's built on the ruins of my life. I will never, ever forgive you for this. I hope you're happy. I truly hope you get everything you deserve. Then I turned my head to the wall, staring at the bland, beige paint until it blurred through my tears. I didn't look back as they left, closing the door on 5.5 years of my life. You'd think that would be the end of it, right? That my family would rally around me, the victim of this monstrous, unthinkable betrayal. You would be wrong. The betrayal from Meredith and Grant was a sharp, deep wound. The betrayal from my parents was a slow-acting poison that seeped in afterwards. A few days after I kicked them out of my room, my parents came to visit. They brought flowers that smelled cloyingly sweet and a bag of magazines I had no interest in reading. They talked about my physical therapy, the weather, a story about a neighbor's cat, anything but the elephant in the room. Finally, my mother sat on the edge of my bed and took my hand. Audrey, honey, she started, her voice cautious and placating. We need to talk about Meredith and Grant. I pulled my hand away. There's nothing to talk about. They made their choice. I made mine. Now, don't be like that, my father chimed in from his chair by the window. He was using his let's be logical voice, the one that always set my teeth on edge. What's done is done. We can't change it. They're getting married in 3 months. We have to think about the family. I stared at him, incredulous. The family? What about me? I'm part of this family, aren't I? Or does that not matter when it's inconvenient? My mother started to cry, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. It was her go-to move. Of course it matters, sweetie. But think of the embarrassment. The gossip. What will people say? We can't have a feud. You have to go to the wedding. You have to stand up there and smile and show everyone that we are a united family. I felt like I was going to be sick. They weren't worried about my broken heart. They were worried about their reputation. They were worried about what the neighbors would think. A few weeks later, after I was discharged and back in my lonely apartment, my mother showed up unannounced. She was holding a thick, cream-colored envelope. The wedding invitation. They wanted to make sure you got one personally, she said, her voice bright and fake. I don't want it, I said, not opening the door all the way. Audrey, Please, she begged, her voice cracking. Just come. For me. Don't make me choose between my daughters. You already chose, I said, my voice flat. You chose the one who didn't cause a scene. The one who makes you look good. She's your problem now. The argument that followed was awful. They pleaded, they reasoned, they guilt-tripped me. They told me I was being dramatic, that I needed to be the bigger person and move on. They didn't understand. They didn't want to understand. To them, my pain was an inconvenience, a messy complication in their perfect family picture. When my mother finally left, leaving the invitation wedged in my door, I felt more alone than I ever had in my entire life. The only person I had left, the only one who saw things clearly, was Miles. He was my only family now. The next few years were a blur of hard work and quiet determination. I threw myself into my recovery with a ferocity that surprised even my doctors. Every painful step in physical therapy, every frustrating session trying to find the right words that my brain couldn't quite grasp, was fueled by a single thought: I will not let them break me. I would not become the broken thing they left behind in that hospital room. I finished my treatments. The day I was finally discharged from outpatient therapy, I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt tired. I went home to my small, quiet apartment on the other side of town, a place I'd chosen specifically because it was far away from my parents and the life I used to have. The first few months were brutally lonely. I remember trying to cook dinner one night, a simple pasta dish, and I dropped the pot, sending spaghetti all over the floor. I just sank down onto the linoleum and sobbed, not because of the pasta, but because the silence in the apartment was so deafening. Slowly, painfully, I built a new life. I went back to work, taking on small freelance projects at first, then eventually finding a full-time job at a small design agency. I made new friends. I learned to live with the lingering effects of the TBI, a slight tremor in my hand when I was tired, a tendency to forget names right after I heard them. I learned to live with the gaping hole in my life where Grant and Meredith used to be. Miles was my rock. He was there for every milestone, big and small. He helped me move, his quiet presence a comfort among the chaos of boxes. He came over for pizza on Friday nights when the loneliness was too much, and we'd watch dumb movies until one of us fell asleep on the couch. He listened without judgment. He never once told me I should get over it. He just let me be. About 4 years after the accident, a friend from work dragged me to a party. I almost didn't go. The idea of small talk in crowds was exhausting. But I went. And that's where I met David. He was kind and patient and funny, with laugh lines around his eyes. He didn't seem intimidated when I struggled to find a word. He just waited. On our third date, I told him everything. I laid it all out, the whole ugly story, expecting him to run. He listened, his expression never changing, and when I was done, my voice hoarse, he just took my hand and said, "They don't deserve to have any more power over you." We got married 2 years later. It was a small, simple ceremony in a public garden. Miles walked me down the aisle. My parents came, but there was a strained politeness between us that never went away. Meredith and Grant were not invited. I heard through the family grapevine that they had 2 kids, a boy and a girl. They'd bought a big house in the suburbs. On paper, they had the perfect life. Sometimes, at night, I'd wonder if he ever thought about me. But I learned to push those thoughts away. I had my own life, a good life. I was happy. Truly. I had chosen to build my own peace, far away from the ruins of my past. I thought I had buried it for good. For 11 years, the silence held. It was a cold, brittle silence, but it was a peace I had fiercely protected. I had no contact with Meredith or Grant. I'd see them at the occasional obligatory holiday dinner at my parents' house, funerals and milestone anniversaries where my absence would cause more drama than my presence. We'd exchange cold, polite nods from across the room. It was an unspoken truce. We lived in separate worlds, orbiting the same family sun but never letting our paths cross. Then, last year, a few months before my wedding anniversary, I had a health scare. It started subtly. Headaches that wouldn't quit. A dizzy spell in the grocery store that left me gripping the shopping cart, my knuckles white. It was nothing like the accident, but the fear was familiar. My doctor ran a bunch of tests, MRIs, blood work, the whole terrifying gauntlet. The waiting was agony. Finally, he concluded it was all stress-related. A nasty, prolonged bout of severe migraines. He told me to slow down, to delegate, to take better care of myself. David was amazing, of course. He took over everything, cooking, cleaning, fielding work calls for me, forcing me to rest on the couch with a blanket and endless cups of tea. I told Miles, but we agreed not to tell my parents until we knew what was going on, to avoid unnecessary panic. But of course, they found out. A well-meaning aunt saw me looking pale at a family function and called my mother. And my mother, in a moment of misguided panic, called Meredith. And just like that, the ghost I had buried for over a decade woke up and started rattling its chains. It started with a text to Miles. Meredith, Mom told me about Audrey's health scare. How is she? I'm so worried. Miles, ever my protector, knew exactly what this was. It wasn't concern. It was an opening. He replied with a curt, "She's fine. It's under control." But Meredith wouldn't let it go. The texts kept coming, each one more insistent than the last. Meredith, can you give me her number? I just want to reach out, let her know I'm thinking of her. I have a right to speak to my own sister. Miles, no. Meredith, Miles, this is ridiculous. We're family. Life is too short for this. What if something serious had happened? I need to know these things. Miles sent her one last message, his anger palpable even through the text. You lost that right 11 years ago when you decided you weren't her sister anymore. Leave her alone. Then he blocked her number. I thought that would be the end of it. But I had forgotten how relentless my sister could be when she wanted something. She couldn't get to me through Miles, so she decided to take a more direct approach. She knew David and I usually had dinner at Miles's house on Friday nights. It was our weekly tradition. And she decided to use that knowledge to set a trap. It was a cool evening in early April, the kind of night that feels full of promise. David and I were leaving Miles's house, walking down his familiar, tree-lined street. We were laughing about some stupid joke Miles had made, my hand tucked into the crook of David's arm. The streetlights cast a warm, yellow glow, and the air was filled with the sweet smell of blooming jasmine from a neighbor's yard. It felt peaceful. Safe. The health scare was behind me, and life felt good again. As we walked towards our car, parked just a few houses down, a figure stepped out from the deep shadows of a large oak tree on the sidewalk. It happened so fast. One moment, there was just the empty sidewalk, and the next, she was there. My laughter died in my throat. My whole body went cold, a sudden, shocking iciness that had nothing to do with the night air. It was Meredith. 11 years had passed, but she looked almost the same. A little older, a few fine lines around her eyes that her expensive creams couldn't hide, but still perfectly put together. She was wearing a tailored beige coat that probably cost more than my first car, her hair in a sleek, professional cut. She looked like she had just stepped out of a boardroom. Audrey, she said, her voice smooth and practiced, as if we had just spoken yesterday. As if she had every right to be there, waiting for me in the dark. David instinctively stepped slightly in front of me, a subtle, protective gesture. His whole body had gone tense. Meredith, he said, his tone polite but firm as granite. I don't think this is a good idea. You should go. I just want to talk to my sister, she said, completely ignoring him, her eyes fixed on me. It was like he wasn't even there. I was so worried when I heard you were sick. Why didn't anyone tell me? I was out of my mind. The audacity of it stole my breath. The performance of it all. The concerned sister, wringing her hands with worry. She was trying to frame this as if she were the victim. The loving family member who was cruelly kept in the dark. "I'm fine, Meredith," I said, my voice tight, each word a struggle. "And we have nothing to talk about. Please move." I started to walk around her, pulling David with me, but she moved to block my path, her body rigid. "Yes, we do," she insisted, her voice losing its smooth edge and gaining a hint of desperation, of demand. "It's been 11 years. It's time to put this behind us. For the family. For my kids. They ask about their aunt, Audrey. They deserve to know their family." That was it. That was the line that snapped the fragile thread of my composure. Her kids. She was going to use her children, the children she had with my ex-boyfriend, as emotional leverage to force her way back into my life. The quiet peace I had spent a decade building was being threatened by the very person who had shattered it in the first place. And I wasn't going to let that happen. "My kids deserve to know their family," Meredith pressed on, her voice rising with a self-righteous indignation that made my blood run cold. She took a step closer, invading my space. "They see pictures of you from before, when you were kids. They ask why Aunt Audrey never comes to their birthdays, why she's not at Christmas. What am I supposed to tell them, Audrey? What lies do I have to make up because you're holding a grudge from over a decade ago?" I just looked at her. The sheer, unadulterated selfishness of her words was breathtaking. This wasn't about her kids. This was about her. She wasn't here for me. She wasn't worried about my health. She was here for herself. This was about sanitizing her past, creating a neat, tidy family narrative for her children, and I was the one messy detail she needed to erase. She wanted absolution without apology. "You're unbelievable," I said, the words coming out in a low, dangerous whisper that was all the more powerful for its quietness. "No, what's unbelievable is your stubbornness," she shot back, her voice growing louder, sharper. She was losing control of the narrative, and she hated it. "I made a mistake, okay? I admitted it. I was young and stupid. Grant was lost. We made a mistake. But it's been 11 years. People go through messy divorces with lawyers and custody battles and handle things more gracefully than this. You've moved on. You're happy. You have a wonderful husband. Why can't you just let it go? You need to, for your own good. Holding on to this anger, it's what's making you sick. It's toxic." She actually said that. She stood there, on a public street under a flickering streetlight, and tried to tell me that my body was failing because of the anger she had caused. That the consequences of her profound betrayal were a character flaw in me. She wasn't asking for forgiveness. She was demanding it. She felt entitled to it. She had stolen my life, and now she was back to steal my peace, claiming it was for my own benefit, a prescription for my health. The rage that I had kept locked away for so long, a sleeping dragon in the cave of my heart, began to stir. It was stretching its wings, and its claws were sharp. She had no idea what she was about to unleash. The dragon was awake. A hot flash crawled up the back of my neck, and the quiet suburban street seemed to pulse with the frantic, furious beating of my heart. David put a steadying hand on my back, but I barely felt it. "A mistake?" I said, my voice shaking with a rage so pure and cold it felt like ice. "You stand there, after ambushing me in the dark, and you call what you did a mistake?" I took a step towards her, closing the distance she had created. For the first time, I saw a flicker of genuine fear in her eyes. The polished mask was gone. She was seeing the real me, the one she had created in that hospital room. "You didn't just make a mistake, Meredith," I said, my voice rising, gaining strength with every word. "You plotted. You conspired. You waited until I was helpless, strapped to a hospital bed, my brain scrambled and my future uncertain, and you systematically dismantled my life. You preyed on my boyfriend's fear, you whispered your poison into his ear day after day, and you stole him from me when I was fighting for my life. That isn't a mistake. That's predatory. Her face went pale, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. That's not what happened, you're being dramatic. Don't you dare lie to me. I shouted, the sound echoing in the quiet street. Don't you stand here and try to rewrite history to soothe your own pathetic conscience. You didn't just sleep with my boyfriend. You waited until I was at my absolute weakest, when I couldn't fight back, couldn't even think straight, and you destroyed me. That wasn't a mistake. That was a choice. An evil, calculated choice. Tears were streaming down my face now, but they were tears of fury, not sadness. A decade of unshed tears. And you want forgiveness? You want a happy family reunion for your kids? Then you tell your kids the truth. You tell them you have no relationship with their aunt because you destroyed her. You tell them their happy little family is built on a foundation of lies and betrayal. That's the story you tell them. And you have the audacity, I spat, to talk about my health? To tell me I need to let it go for my own good? My health has nothing to do with anger and everything to do with the trauma you inflicted on me. By now, Miles had heard the shouting and had come outside. He stood on his porch, his phone in his hand, watching, ready to intervene. I will never, I said, jabbing a finger towards her, my whole body trembling. Ever. Forgive you. The happy, peaceful life I have now, I built it myself. Out of the ashes you left behind. You are not entitled to one single piece of it. You are not entitled to my forgiveness. You are not entitled to my peace. Now get away from me. She was speechless, her perfect composure shattered. She just stood there, gaping at me. Miles came down the steps, his face grim. You heard her, he said to Meredith, his voice cold as steel. It's time for you to go. When she didn't move, just stood there frozen, he raised his phone. Or I can call the police and have you removed for trespassing and harassment. Your choice. That finally did it. The threat of public humiliation. She shot me one last look of pure hatred and scurried back to her expensive car, driving off into the night. As the red taillights disappeared, I finally let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding for 11 years. If you're still listening to this, please, do me a favor. Help me out by liking this video and just comment with the number 1 down below. It lets me know you gave me a like, and it tells me you're here with me on this journey. Your support means more than you know, it truly does. Just comment with the number 1, and then I'll tell you the very last part of my story. The aftermath of the confrontation was surprisingly quiet. Meredith didn't try to contact me or Miles again. There were no angry texts, no dramatic voicemails. I think, for the first time, she understood that some doors are meant to stay closed forever. The finality in my voice had finally gotten through to her. The only fallout was the inevitable and exhausting phone call from my parents. My mother called the next day, her voice trembling with disappointment. Audrey, Miles told us what happened, she said. I can't believe you had him call the police on your own sister. Your own flesh and blood. I was too tired to be angry anymore. I sat on my couch, the morning sun streaming in, and I just felt weary. Mom, she ambushed me on the street. She was screaming at me. She refused to leave. What did you expect us to do? But she was just trying to make amends. She feels terrible, my mother insisted. You have to be willing to meet her halfway. What happens when we're gone? At our funeral, are you two just going to stand on opposite sides of the room and glare at each other? What about the inheritance? The house? This feud is going to tear everything apart. There it was. The real fear. Not our relationship, but the logistics of their death. The messy details of their will. I took a deep breath, and a strange sense of calm washed over me. Mom, the family was torn apart 11 years ago. I'm just living with the reality of it. My relationship with her is over. It has been for a long time. And honestly, I don't care about the inheritance. You can leave it all to her. I don't want it. I want peace. That's all I want. And my peace exists in a life where she is not in it. Nothing is going to change that. Not a funeral, not a house, nothing. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I knew I had hurt her, but it was a truth that needed to be said. I had spent so many years trying to be the good daughter, the one who smoothed things over. But peace at the cost of my own well-being isn't peace at all. It's surrender. David and Miles have been my true family. They stood by me without question. They never asked me to be the bigger person or to forgive for the sake of appearances. They just loved me and respected my boundaries. Someone once told me that holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. For a long time, I believed that. I felt guilty for not being able to forgive Meredith. But now, I see it differently. Forgiveness isn't a requirement for healing. Sometimes, not forgiving is an act of self-preservation. It's acknowledging that what happened was so damaging, so wrong, that there is no going back. It's choosing to protect the peaceful life you've fought so hard to build. I don't owe them forgiveness. But I owe myself peace. And my peace is found in a life where Meredith and Grant are nothing more than ghosts of a past I survived. That is my choice. And it's a choice I will protect, always. Thanks for listening to my story. If you've been through anything like this, or just feel for what I went through, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. And if you think someone else needs to hear this, please feel free to share. It helps to know we're not alone.